Hey guys, it's Gotea. Before the video begins, I do want to give a content warning. Some of the topics that I'll be getting into for a few of these stories are pretty heavy and kind of twisted. I'm not one to usually give warnings before videos like these, but due to the nature of some of these stories, viewer discretion will be advised. This isn't by any means the worst thing I've ever witnessed, but maybe the craziest. A few years ago, right after Christmas, we got a call to a house for a hanging. The wife had hung herself in the garage, and the husband found her and had to cut her down. By the time we got there, the husband had vomit all over his face from where he was giving his wife mouth to mouth, and you could tell that she was probably too far gone. Anyways, we still work her through our whole protocol and end up calling it a short time later. The husband was obviously devastated and extremely distraught, and by the time we had left the scene, the police department had already arrived, and we already knew that family was coming in from out of town to support the husband and the family's children. Well, like 4 hours later, we get a call back to the same address for a self-inflicted gunshot wound. When the husband's family had arrived from out of town, he went into his bathroom and blew his head off with an AR-15 sitting on the toilet. He also blew off the tank reservoir for the toilet, so water was leaking, which created this little stream of blood in the grout of the tile all the way to the bedroom door. I've seen a lot of self-inflicted gunshot wounds, but the way this dude's head was concaved in was just wild. This couple also had 4 children, all under the age of 8 years old, who were in the house for both of their parents doing what they did, just hours apart from one another. Christmas decorations still strung throughout the house, and new toys were everywhere. I can't imagine what the family members from out of town must have been thinking, or where those little kids ended up. One of my closest friends works on an ambulance, so I hear pretty wild stories most of the time. He was first on the scene to a freeway car accident at about 10 p.m. A car had flipped and was in the emergency lane. The people weren't too hurt, but they did have to load one person into the ambulance. As they are helping these people, he hears a really loud thud on the other side of the freeway. A car had hit a person who was trying to run across the freeway. He said the car must have been going at least 70 miles an hour. He shines his flashlight and sees their body in a heap probably 20 feet in front of the car. The car actually just drives off, and he thinks about hopping over the median to pull the guy off the road, but then notices tons of cars coming up the road going easily 70 plus miles per hour, as it was in the fast lane. He said he proceeded to watch 5 to 7 cars continuously run over this man's body until he was nothing but paste smeared across the road. This all happened before police and firefighters got on scene. Turns out the person who had caused the accident had actually flipped their car as well, and it was off the right side of the road, farther down where they hadn't initially seen it. They think that the person who caused the accident tried to flee the scene and run across the freeway when they ended up getting run over. I have 3 stories. The first one was a motorcycle versus a deer. Motorcycle and driver were both fine. Deer got cut in half, but was still alive when we got there. It was screaming. Now I'm a city boy, and I never heard a deer make any noise like that in my life. The paramedic I was with walked over to the deer and dispatched it. The second story was a guy who had just dropped his kids off at his ex-wife's house, walked around to her front porch, sat down, put a shotgun under his chin, and pulled the trigger. He was still alive when we got there, but died shortly after we got him to the hospital. The third story, a guy and his wife were drunk driving down some old country roads, fleeing from the police. The road dog-legged, but the vehicle didn't, and went straight into a tree. We got the call that there was an entrapment, and the vehicle was on fire. By the time we arrived, the fire department had already put out the fire. The husband had climbed out of the truck and ran. They caught up with him in a creek bed and tased him. They had to use the jaws of life to get the wife out. When they pulled her out, her right foot was hanging on by about 4 inches of skin and tendon. The surgeon saved the foot. Listen, there's a lot of sad, gory, rough stories here, so how about a funny one? Disclaimer, I am but a simple paramedic. I went to a dude who was experiencing a sudden onset of short-term memory loss. Kicker is, it started midway through sex. His wife noticed him repeating phrases or questions and then getting confused whether her less than enthusiastic response to, "You like that?" was answered for the 50th time in 2 minutes. So we get there, vitals are fine, EKG is unremarkable, and his LAM score is 0, so other than this sudden amnesia, he is technically fine. We treat it as a stroke and transport him to the appropriate center. Turns out he had something called global transient amnesia. Google it, it's wild. Often it starts during vigorous exercise or, commonly, intercourse. It lasts up to 24 hours, and as far as anyone can tell from studies, it doesn't leave any lasting damage. The most common symptom is short-term sudden onset amnesia with repeated questions literally seconds apart. Watching this guy know something was wrong, but just not able to fully connect the dots was heartbreaking, but I'm so happy to know he made a full recovery. Moral of the story? Women, you can screw his brains out. I went to a car crash involving a side impact into a concrete pole at 100 miles an hour. Another crew member and I sat behind the destroyed B-pillar, holding this guy's mostly open skull shut. He was somehow conscious and repeatedly asking us if he was going to die, to which we had to keep lying to him, telling him that he was going to be okay. We were there for about 10 minutes with him, which felt more like an hour, before a Flight for Life helicopter landed and some absolutely badass trauma specialists who managed to keep him alive long enough for the airlift to the hospital. Anyways, it turns out we weren't actually lying to him. He ended up making a full recovery, which was literally a miracle from my point of view, given the state that we found him in. We don't usually get closure on these sorts of jobs, but a week after the rescue, the patient's tearful mother showed up at our firehouse to thank us and let us know that he was in a good place, and also gave us what still to this day is the best tasting cake I have ever eaten. I've been an EMT for about 5 years, mostly part-time through college and as a side hustle. I've been to shootings, full arrests, respiratory, dead-on arrivals, and more overdoses than I can count. But my most unexpected story comes from early in my career. We were about halfway through our shift, and my partner was the darkest black cloud I have ever worked with. For those who don't know, some people in EMS just seem to attract gnarly calls like a magnet, and we call them black clouds. Shift had been pretty chill so far, so I stupidly assumed it would continue like that. We get dispatched cold, as to no lights or sirens, to a headache at a church not far from us. My partner was the senior EMT on the shift, so I'm driving at the moment, and he puts on some Eminem while we make our way down there. We walk into the church, and the first thing I hear is, "What took you so long? My grandmother just went blind." Now, if sudden blindness isn't setting off alarm bells, that plus headache really should be. As it was a headache, and we were just in the lobby of a building, not going up elevators or anything. We had just walked into the building with nothing. My partner takes one look at the patient and says, "Get a stretcher out, we're leaving." We get her loaded up. I check her blood pressure and stroke scale, while my partner calls the receiving hospital and gives them a report. Stroke scales are scored out of 4, with anything less than a 4 out of 4 being a roughly 90% chance of being a stroke. The patient scored 0. You best believe we took the patient to the hospital hot. While we were driving, the patient had intervals where she would stop breathing before coming back around. As we get to the hospital, I notice my partner has placed AED pads on her. We took that patient directly up to imaging, and that was my lesson to myself as to why you can never truly trust your dispatch. For approximately 6 weeks, I was a dispatcher for a large county covering 27 plus cities, villages, townships, etc., and we were also linked to state troopers. After only 6 weeks at this job, I was pretty much convinced it was not for me. My view on the world changed rapidly, and I couldn't stop myself from taking all the problems home in my head. The call that sealed the deal, where I knew I was not cut out for, was this. A man called and said his baby mama was a prostitute, and that she had been moving from motel to motel with her 6-month-old daughter, who he didn't have custody of. Another prostitute that knew her called him to inform him that his infant daughter had died, and his baby mama was carrying her around with her in a suitcase because she didn't know what to do with the body. The guy on the phone was very upset and said he was looking for her amongst what he planned on doing to her once he found her. That was it for me. I put in my 2 weeks the next morning. God bless you, first responders. Most of us can't do what you do. When I was a brand new EMT, I was starting to get comfortable with my partner, and he was starting to trust me a little more to bring me in lower acuity stuff. Well, it was Halloween night 2021, around 2 a.m., and we were sent out to this shack way out in the boonies. We get there, and these younger Hispanic guys lead us into a room in the back where their grandma was. This lady straight up looked like a bruja, a witch, super skinny and very old. She was wearing tattered clothes and hadn't bathed in a long time. It was noticeable. Her hair was all matted and dirty. She had fallen down and smacked her head on a corner of something, and she was on blood thinners, so her face was completely covered in blood, like every inch. The wildest thing was, she was demented and nonverbal, so she communicated through pointing and kind of cackling. No frickin' joke. My partner tells me this is BLS, and asks if I'd be okay taking her in. I honestly wasn't, but I didn't want to bitch out. So here I was, a fresh EMT on Halloween, bouncing around in the back of an ambulance with this witch all covered in blood and freaking cackling at me and pointing at absolutely nothing. When we tried to clean her up, she would swing at us, so we brought her in as is. The ER thought it was a Halloween prank. I once responded to 3 simultaneous fatalities. It's a sleepy town, so when it first came in as a call, it was strange. I remember quite clearly pulling up to the house and seeing the face of a distraught father. My heart sunk. I knew the man and his family. They were good people. I ran into the house to see 3 young adults dead on the floor. The youngest was 19, and I just saw all 3 of them last night at the start of my shift. They were friendly to me and joking before I left that evening. I checked on 2 of them that were lying on their backs, and their pulses were gone. One of the victims was in a sitting position, so I pushed her on her back to check her vitals. I didn't know it at the time, but when I rolled her back, I heard air expand in her chest. It was just air expanding. I had a moment of hope and thought one of them had lived. I had a moment of relief and thought about how rough of a recovery this was going to be for her, and I went to begin CPR, but then I saw her face. Her eyes were partially closed, her skin tinged blue, blood running down her face, and her body stiff. All hope I had was gone. For weeks I had nightmares about them, and sometimes my brain would see them in public, and would have to remind myself that who I was seeing wasn't those people. They had died. I spoke to the victims' parents quite a lot, and was berated by one of them for not doing enough, and it hurt. The victims were all good people, just got exposed to fentanyl at a party from some other drugs. I've dealt with other things afterwards, but that moment of hope lost when I thought I could start CPR broke me for a long time. Park ranger here. You would think park ranger is a happy, fun job until you realize parks are one of the #1 destinations for people to off themselves. I worked graveyard shift for a while. One night, I was closing a park, so I'm driving around telling pretty much everyone remaining to get out until I approached this one vehicle that was kind of at the beginning of the trail, kind of hidden. I was assuming it was a couple looking for a spot, but got no response when using my vehicle's PA system. A few minutes go by and I saw no movement, so I got out to check. There was a guy in his underwear with the seat reclined all the way, with dried blood coming from eyes and nose and ears, bloated already, going into rigor mortis. The guy had been sitting in the car dead in the Florida sun for about a week, and no one saw him. And the smell, man, that shit you don't confuse with any other smell. It was by far the worst shit I have ever smelled. I've seen some others in my day, but that one by far was the worst, just due to the smell.